Can I say, first of all, I suppose there was a certain nervousness about this debate. First of all, because, as many members have said, and I think it has been a measured debate, we do not wish to paint the picture of Northern Ireland as being back in the 1970s and the 1980s. And there has been considerable progress made, and I'm glad to see that my colleague from North Belfast, when he introduced the subject, gave a very balanced picture of a Northern Ireland which has moved on considerably. The Secretary of State echoed that, the Shadow Secretary of State echoed that, indeed all other speakers have said it. Because we do not want, the one thing I think which would give great consolation to those who murdered Prison Officer Black would be that the vile act which they did would then be used to try and destabilise Northern Ireland further, economically, politically, and in all other ways. It hasn't happened. The family acted with dignity, the community has acted, and the security forces have acted in a responsive way, and that's important. Because for Northern Ireland to succeed, for us to move in the direction where we want to move, to a normal society, a prosperous society, a society that gives hope to young people who are looking for jobs, families who want to bring up their children in a stable environment. We cannot allow the cancer of terrorism to once again push Northern Ireland onto the headlines for all of the wrong reasons. I think the second reason is this. I don't wish, because there are still people in Northern Ireland who, despite all of the changes which there have been, despite the fact that this year we have had more tourists coming than we've ever had, we have succeeded, even in the middle of a recession, in bringing more investment, foreign direct investment, than any other region, bar the southeast of England, to our economy. Despite all of that, there are still some people who would love to, and who seem to want to wallow. That's right. That things are just as bad as what they ever were. That's right. And one of the things I don't want this debate to do is to give credence to that kind of view of life. That is not where Northern Ireland is today, and we've already made announcements and referred to the events that have happened this year, the events we're looking forward to next year. Even in Londonderry, with its Republican and Nationalist majority in the council, they're going to celebrate the UK City of Culture next year. That's how Northern Ireland has changed. We may even get the Deputy First Minister going to the Brits Awards, for goodness sake. So we have had, and there are changes. My colleague says the Brits House Awards. I haven't heard that phrase for a long time, actually, because of course there are those changes. However, and I think it is important that we, as members have pointed out, that we do not get complacent, and that we do recognise that there are dangers still lurking there. Dangers which, and dangers which of course do affect the lives of people on a day-to-day basis in Northern Ireland, and we've got to deal with those. And I think as we do deal with them, there are a number of things. And first of all, I accept that we, as the public representatives in Northern Ireland, have a responsibility to deal with them ourselves. We cannot, and I am glad that we are moving away from the days when we went and asked everybody else to help us with our problems, and we relied on other people to sort our problems out for us. We have a devolved administration. That includes parties right across the board. It's a difficult arrangement to work when you're dealing with people who are as financially irresponsible as Sinn Féin, and marginally behind them the SDLP. when you've got all of the difficulties that people have. I mean, members have mentioned it. On one hand, support for the police, but if the police start to deal with some of the colleagues of those who are involved in terrorism, then suddenly that support becomes qualified. It's disgraceful, and I will give way. Yes.
I thank the member for giving way. Would he also share my concern that in terms of a responsibility, when you have members of his own party who are ministers who would advocate civil disobedience in the face of violence in the streets of our cities, that is also irresponsible and should be condemned and avoided?
Peaceful.
Well, I think that in any democratic society there is always the opportunity for people to engage in peaceful protests. If that's what the member is referring to, then I think it is important that we put it on. There is a huge difference between someone advocating that members of the public can engage in peaceful protest and those who say that when the police go through the due process and deal with people, arrest them for serious crimes, the crime of murder, that somehow or other that's political policing. Or indeed, and I notice the SDLP have been particularly quiet about it. It's one thing away in the back of Beyond in Dungannon Council to support the release of someone and call for the release of someone who was guilty of murdering or trying to murder your council colleague. It's another thing, of course, to stand up here in the House of Commons and defend it, and I notice they haven't tried to do that because there's a bit more public scrutiny of that kind of thing. It is important that we in Northern Ireland take responsibility for, first of all, seeking to try and heal the divisions of the past, but also giving support to those who have to deal with the reality of the lingering terrorism which we still experience. I think that secondly, we've got a responsibility, and the Shadow Secretary of State made reference to it. I don't buy the idea that people get involved in terrorism because they're economically deprived. Some of those, I think that we do an injustice to people who have lived their lives in difficult economic conditions and never got involved in crime if somehow or other we make the excuse that this is all down to people's deprived economic conditions. But we do have the responsibility, I believe, to give hope in a society where people can have a stake in it, can feel that there is something better for me, that this is a place where I want to belong, and the executive, of course, is seeking to do that as well, and seeking to direct resources towards those targets of people who are young and unemployed, people who have lost their jobs, etc., and looking at inventive and innovative ways of trying to give that economic hope to people. The third thing, and this is where I do think that we come to the responsibility which may at some stage lie with the government here at Westminster. There is a need for security policies which will be effective. And the first thing is this, that if we're going to deal with terrorism, a number of references have been made already to this, we've got to have intelligence. Now, there are ways of gathering intelligence, electronic surveillance and everything else, but getting human intelligence sources is important. The security services are responsible for gathering that intelligence in Northern Ireland. And unfortunately, I know that their hands have been hampered. I can remember when my time in the police board, and some of the unrealistic demands that were made, especially by some of the SDLP representatives at that stage, because they didn't have Sinn Féin on the police board at that stage. You'd almost had to be a Sunday school teacher to become an informant for the police at that stage, because there were so many restrictions that they wanted placed on. If the person was involved in this and involved in this and involved in this, then they could not be recruited as an intelligence source. And you were left with people who wouldn't have had an idea about what was going on in the criminal underworld of terrorism if you'd stuck by those. And so I think that there is an important element here, that can we get the intelligence which is required And what changes do we need to get the intelligence which is required to make sure that those who want to engage in these kinds of activities are quickly identified and the crimes that they want to do are identified? Secondly, there will be a resource element. And I know that the Police Federation have talked about 1,000 extra police officers. I don't know if we need 1,000 extra police officers or not. What I do know is if you're going to target terrorists and you're going to have intensive surveillance on them, then that will require additional resources. And I've got to say, and here I do want to pay credit to the government, because when the Policing and Justice was devolved, we were given additional resources for policing. It was to be on a yearly basis of £50 million, depending on the assessment of the security situation, etc. The Chief Constable and the Northern Ireland Executive made a case that, look, you've got to plan ahead. You can't be relying on, or we're going to get the £50 million next year because the security assessment might say it's okay, or we're going to have to wait to see whether the security situation is deteriorated before the money comes available. Can we not have the money over the 4-year period guaranteed at the start and secured, so that planning can take place, made a better use of the resources? And the Treasury, and I've got to pay tribute, the government did accept that, and that's why the Chief Constable has been able to plan ahead. But there may well be a requirement for additional resources in the future. And can I say that if there is a call for those additional resources, this will be to deal with a national security situation, not just simply to have more community policemen on the ground in Northern Ireland. And I can understand why members right across this House, when they see cuts in their own police service and everything else, if it was simply for that purpose, they would say, well, why Northern Ireland? Why is it treated differently than other parts of the United Kingdom, where there are constraints upon police budgets? I understand that. But the situation that we're talking about is not one which is simply applies to Northern Ireland. This is a situation which, if it gets out of hand, and let's remember this, members in this House, if it gets out of hand, it has national security implications. Republicans would far, far rather do something on mainland UK than in Northern Ireland. It's much more newsworthy. They get the base, they get the wherewithal, they get the ability, and they get the mechanisms for doing it, and you can be sure this is where the targets will be. And therefore, I think that if the Chief Constable makes the assessment that additional resources are needed, then of course I hope that there will be the kind of positive response we have seen in the future. That's not to say that we in the Northern Ireland Executive must not do something, and indeed we have given greater flexibility to the security budget than any other budget, when, as with any other department where money is not spent on the thing it was voted for, or can't be spent on the things it's voted for, it's got to be returned to the centre, be looked at again. The security budget has been ring-fenced so that the Chief Constable has much greater flexibility. So, again, it is not an issue of let's just hold out our hands and look for more money. It's what can we do for ourselves, first of all. But if the situation it does deteriorate, and I hope that it won't. I hope that there's never a need to call upon this House and the government for any more resources for policing in Northern Ireland. I want to see policing return to normality. And the citizens of Northern Ireland want to see policing return to normality. But if there is, then I think that that's one thing that can be done. In closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, can I say I appreciate the responses that are being right across the House, the support that there's been across the House, the recognition that there's been across the House of the situation in Northern Ireland. We, for our part, have raised this because we believe it was important for the people who live in Northern Ireland to be highlighted. It's been raised in a measured way, not in an alarmist way, but in a way which I believe we have a duty as public representatives in Northern Ireland to do.